It's important that they invest, and these shows are a very easy way for them to invest in themselves and their business. It almost is kind of a, if you don't know what you don't know,
Yeah.
how do you keep growing, right?
Hey, everybody. James Shepard here with another edition of the Merchant Sales Podcast. This week, I'm talking to John Newton, Chief Organizer there at the WSAA. And we're talking about these industry events. Should you go? Should you not? Should you be a sponsor? Should you be an attendee? How do you maximize networking? So a lot of great topics for you today talking about that. The WSAA is actually a sponsor of CC Sales Pro. And so we are promoting the WSAA this year, sending out some promotional emails for them and vice versa. And so I'm excited about that partnership and I want to announce that here on the podcast. Really think you want to go to these events. The best deals that I've generally made at these events or connections from these events. And so it's a great use of time. Highly encourage you to do that. Have a bit of a shorter episode today. I'm actually going to be on vacation with my family at the beach, so I didn't record the Today in Payments. With that being said, this podcast is brought to you by Nativia. Head over to nativia.com/CC Sales Pro or catch up with their team at the WSAA or any of the industry events. They always have a lot of booths and a lot of parties and things like that going on. So make sure and catch up with them at the shows as well. With that being said, let's dive into this episode. Hey, everybody. I'm here with John Newton, who is officer and organizer over at the WSAA. How you doing today, John?
Doing great, James. How about yourself?
I am doing fantastic. So, John and I hadn't talked for a little while, so it's great kind of just catching up with you, John. For those that don't know your story, tell us a little bit about your story before we dive in. We're going to talk about obviously these regional shows and how to get the most out of that, but I always love hearing the payment story. It's kind of a crazy industry that we're in. How did you end up doing what you're doing today?
Absolutely. Well, it is a crazy industry that we're in, but full of great people.
Yeah.
Actually got into it 25 years ago through my cousin at Cayman Tech, and then spent a number of years there in the sales world, dealing with associations and large franchise groups, and then spent, the second story of my or chapter of my career was really in at First American Payment Systems in the ISO world, getting to learn that the outside sales world of payments, which
Yeah.
was fantastic. And then most recently, I've been working here at Aperia Compliance, working with that same ISO and processor community. But this time, instead of being on the merchant acquiring side, talking about PCI compliance and portfolio level reporting,
Yeah.
not only domestically, but also with a global reach.
Right. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that's definitely an area that doesn't maybe get as much focus as it needs to get, and a lot of times it can be I've always found PCI compliance to be something where I would say it's like car insurance. It's like you might say, oh, I don't really want to have car insurance. I don't think I'm going to get in a wreck, and it's like, well, maybe you won't. But if you do, it's going to be a big problem, right?
It's great to have, and I think PCI compliance is also evolving into more of risk mitigation, right? Preventing attacks and then, identifying them when they happen and then
Yeah.
mitigating it on the back end.
Yeah, love it. All right, so today's topic, John, we want to talk about these regional shows, specifically the WSAA. And what I was hoping we could do is kind of break down because our audience is comprised. I look at it as three groups. We have kind of the individual agent, small ISO. Then we have kind of those larger ISOs, industry execs, and then we have the company angle of actually being a sponsor of the show. So I want to kind of break those three down and really talk about why would people go to the shows? What should they hope to accomplish? So let's start with that agent. And I think this is a really underserved community, meaning that there's a lot of individual agents and small ISOs out there that just never go to any of these shows. So help them understand, what are they missing out on? Why should they go to a show like the WSAA?
Well, I think there's a number of components when you start talking about the smaller or the regional shows. Small is not the right word for them anymore, by the way.
Yes. Right.
Regional is absolutely correct, but
Yes.
at the agent and the small ISO level, there's incredible educational opportunities for these guys to come in across a variety of topics, whether it's just what's going on in the marketplace, how payments is being viewed in Washington from a federal perspective,
Right.
down to sales level tips and tactics to go sell more or um, to really drive home that customer experience need. And so the educational piece for a small agent in ISO is immense, but there's also a really nice networking aspect to these shows as well, where they can bounce ideas off their cohorts out in the field.
Right.
They can identify new products and solutions that they want to go sell. And they can, again, that in the networking perspective, they get an opportunity to meet with people that they otherwise wouldn't get to know,
Yep.
whether it's at larger organizations, or if they're looking, as example, if they're thinking about taking a capital infusion or selling a piece of their portfolio to expand their growth.
Yeah, I'm always amazed at just the breadth of like people that are at these events. There's such a variety. I mean, again, I would say it seems to me at least that especially the individual agent and smaller ISO, I feel like they're probably the least likely to attend these. A lot of them do, but I mean, as far as percentage wise, there's a huge chunk that don't, and I think they really miss out because a lot of them are either they have this lone wolf mentality and they're kind of doing their thing and building their business. And it's like, well, you're missing out on all these best practices or changes are going to come out of nowhere. And I feel like these events are where you learn about all those things, and it's hard to quantify that. But it's like when you go and you leave, you're like, wow, I definitely, I've never gone to a show where I didn't leave and was like, man, I got a ton of value from that, both from the educational side and the networking side.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point just on the value of the show. The shows for attendees for those smaller agents and ISOs are highly affordable,
Yeah.
especially because they're regional. So it's not always a cross country flight and four
Right.
nights in a hotel.
Right.
And the shows always have great um, food and snacks and parties and things to help engage everyone.
Yeah.
But I think that there are more. I think more folks show up than I think we all wrap our head around. But I think you're right. There are plenty of folks who don't go to the shows because they feel like they've got a really good deal, or they feel like they really like the ISO or the payments processor that they're working with.
Right. Well, and I think too, it's almost like I think a lot of the agent and smaller ISO almost feels like that's not their thing. In other words, it's like that's for the bigger companies and the payments execs and things like that. That's not for me. But I think, and maybe you could even speak to that when you look at, the way you guys are putting together, let's say the WSAA, right? What is some of the content or some of the focuses that you already have that would be geared when you're in those meetings and talking about that? What are the things you're already doing that you're trying to gear that for that individual agent that's doing, 10 deals a month to help them improve and grow their business?
Sure. Maybe I'll talk a little bit from a historical perspective.
Sure.
So in years past, we've done things, payments boot camp, payments 101, some very educational type sessions that not only speak to the smaller ISO or an individual agent, but they're specifically designed to help them take steps to grow the business, whether it's actual sales training or operational training, credit and risk and underwriting type lectures and educational sessions. So there's things that are just purpose built, if you will, for
Yeah.
those agents and ISOs to come in and learn how to. A lot of them got into the business similar to anybody else, right? I've got a guy, or I answered a phone call, and next thing I knew, I was selling merchant services.
Right.
Well, I think when we're out on the street and look, these guys are grinders, right? They're when they're not selling, they're not earning,
Right.
and so when it's important that they invest, and these shows are a very easy way for them to invest in themselves and their business. And it almost is kind of if you don't know what you don't know,
Yeah.
how do you keep growing, right? So
Right.
it's really important, I think, and important for them to be at the shows. I think there's tremendous value for somebody
Yeah.
that's out on the street selling to get a better idea of what's going on in the marketplace for them.
Yeah, I remember. I was trying to remember. I think it was maybe 5 years ago or 4 years ago, I did a talk at the WSAA in one of the big rooms where we were talking about, at that time, it was dual pricing and integrated payments. And, we packed that room out. I mean, there was hundreds of people in there, and it was really cool because for one thing, it was encouraging to see this many people getting together, right? But the other thing is, I've had people come to me since then many times that have said, "Hey, I was in that room, and at that time, they weren't really thinking about how dual pricing and integrated payments would come together. They weren't thinking about these two trends overlapping. Many of them weren't, were still thinking that dual pricing could only be a non-compliant version. So they were kind of, and the in the 4 or 5 years since then, those two trends have absolutely taken over the market. And I think that a lot of the agents that were in that room, because they came to that show, they were opened up to a whole concept. And then what happens is, after I was done with that talk, there was a 15-minute break. Well, after that talk, everybody in that room starts talking to each other. Hey, are you selling integrated payments right now for vertical specific ISVs? Are they doing dual pricing? And all of a sudden it was this whole conversation. And so, yeah, I think agents and ISOs, again, to your point, there's just, again, you don't know what you don't know. And when you get in that environment, it's going to trigger things that you're going to realize. And if you get one thing from the show that you take away from it, it's like, well, that was totally worth the investment, right?
Well, you're totally right. And I think even if you think about some of the larger organizations that attend our shows, it's really, if you can take two or three things back and share with your team, that can benefit you or your ops team or somewhere
Yeah.
else in the organization, I think it's very powerful.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk now about the networking aspect of it. So, I was thinking back, and most of the big deals that I have personally done, whether that would be acquisition, capital raise, sale of a business, or whatever, either was initiated at or was closed at a regional show. And I think there's a reason for that. All of the money people are there. All the big players are there, and so you get this FaceTime, right? And so what I would love to understand is, what are your thoughts on this? And the reason I ask this is because from the perspective of somebody kind of organizing one of these shows, I can see it as a double-edged sword a little bit, because a lot of times I'll go to a regional show and I'll spend the majority of the time at the Starbucks, like right outside of it or whatever, because I'm just doing deals and people are coming and talking to me. And then it's like, oh man, I got to get in and do my talk. Or I want to go see what's going on how do you balance that? Talk about that a little bit and kind of that value of the networking aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll speak for WASA really out of the gate, which is there are built-in networking opportunities, right?
Right.
So whether that's the golf tournament or any of the opening reception type opening and closing receptions, there's some after parties and things which are always big hits, but there's something to in this, especially in this crazy payments world, right?
Yeah.
There's something to everybody sitting around after a day of educational sessions, a day of working the trade show floor, sitting down with people, and whether it's having a cocktail or sharing a cup of coffee, just making real connections. And I think the regional shows, and I'm not disparaging the big shows, the Money 2020s, the Transacts, but the regional shows they're comfortable. They're
Yeah.
small enough where you can have there's time to actually have some real meaningful conversation,
Hmm.
and get to know people beyond what logo they're wearing on their shirt, and
Yeah.
what booth they're standing at, right?
Right.
So that networking, and as you alluded to earlier, you've got anybody at these shows from an individual sales agent to CEOs of major payments organizations, both domestically and globally, showing up at the shows.
Right.
So there's access, number one, and then there's I would look at it from a regional show perspective as kind of like the connective tissue from processors and acquirers to and the banks to down to the sales agents.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. I think that, even, again, thinking about the investment banks that are involved in the space that show up, I feel like, I don't know, there's just such a wide variety. And it's so interesting too, because I feel like, as you're getting ready to go to the shows, one thing that I try to do is I want to reach out, and I know, like I'm sure you guys do this as well, of kind of sharing some registration information. You want to reach out ahead of time, right? And you want to plan. You don't want it to all be. You want the serendipity of running into that person you hadn't met or whatever. But I think you also want some structure and like, hey, what am I trying to accomplish in the next 12 months? And who are the people? Like, let me pick 3 or 4 that I definitely need to meet with while I'm there. And then you reach out to them and you plan that meeting because that FaceTime, there's something about that you just don't get over Google Meet, you don't get over Zoom. There's something about that FaceTime, and also I will say too, you have a much higher likelihood of even getting the meeting in the first place. There are people that, for me now, I could pretty much get a meeting with whoever, but I mean, I remember as I was coming up in the industry, there were people that I really wanted to talk to that I knew if I emailed them, they would never do a Zoom, But if I reached out to their assistant and said, "Hey, I'm going to be at the show. Can I have 5 minutes?" I would tend to get in that room, and even if not, I would just track them down and at the show and talk to them, right?
No, you're absolutely right. Having a strategy going into the show is an absolute must, and I think that goes for everybody, right? Um, you know, uh, there are shows that I've been to where I've had just about every minute of every day booked into a meeting,
Right.
and sometimes it's logistically difficult to make all of them on
It
time.
is. Yes. Yeah.
But it is great to reach out. I know plenty of folks let you know where they're going to be via social media, LinkedIn, et cetera, on podcasts.
Right.
And then understanding who you want to talk to when you walk in the door, and making sure that you prioritize those meetings because if not, the show can be fast.
Yeah.
If you're just going with the flow, sometimes you look up and you're like, well, it's closing reception, and I didn't take care of the 2 things I needed to do.
Right.
So prioritizing those things and making sure that you get them done out of the gate is really huge. And then I think always following up afterward, right? I mean,
Mhm.
there's plenty of business cards to be collected,
Right.
plenty of phone numbers to grab, and then making sure that you stay connected with those folks,
Mhm.
after the show.
Yeah. Yeah. One other like little side tip I would give them, I was curious to hear your thoughts. One thing I've learned is following up after the show, I tend to steer away from email. I want to make sure I have text message or phone numbers. I want to call or text people because I feel like right after the show is kind of when you get spammed with like, "Hey, you were at the show," and they're just grabbing the registration list. So you just kind of ignore those. And I found that even people where it's like, "Man, I had a really good meeting with them. I want to have a follow up." I send them an email. They just put it in, and they delete it, thinking that it's some random thing. Whereas when I text them, I tend to get a little bit of a better response that way after the show.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that there's also, like I said, if you're going to go out to WASA, you're going to spend 2 or 3 days out of the office, right, dedicated to the show, and you might be checking email and returning some calls, um, but that means that by the time you get back, you've got a day or two that you really need to spend
Yeah.
cleaning things up and diving back into things,
Right.
and so I think a text. Certainly works really well. But it's also, I think it's the cadence, right? I think if you spent the time there and you've made a real connection, I think what ends up happening is again, everybody's more likely to pick up the phone when you're calling them, after you've actually sat down and had a meaningful conversation.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's like the little things to me of, sharing your contact with them, texting their, so they save it so that when you do call, your name pops up and you have your picture there, so like little things like that, I think matter a lot. Okay. So we talked about kind of the agent. We talked about the maybe larger ISO payments executive where the networking is really the big thing. They really want to make those connections. And again, thinking, I think going into the shows is the time you think bigger and you're like, okay, where do I want my business to be in 2 or 3 years? Who would be a person that I want to make a connection with to do that? And then really making and it being intentional about, okay, how am I going to track this person down? Let me reach out to them and see if I can just set up again, 5 minutes. Usually people are at the show. They're like, oh, I'm at the show anyway. This agent wants to meet me or the small ISO. Sure, I'll meet with them. So now let's switch gears and talk about sponsorship. So the various businesses I own, we've done sponsorships at different events. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, depending on where we're at in the life cycle. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Why should someone be a sponsor? What should they be looking to gain from that? And then what other tips do you have about kind of planning that, with something like WSAA?
Sure. So let's talk planning first, because I will tell you from experience, both being on the board as well as prior to that sponsoring,
Mhm.
um, sponsor early. Sponsorships run out, and so the
Yep.
big stuff, especially if you're gonna launch a product or rebrand or something that strategically fits that you want to make a splash, right? The show's in your backyard. Those types of things. We have some great sponsors at WSAA. I know that all the regionals have some excellent sponsors. We've got certainly a lot of overlap, which is fantastic. But there are definite brand awareness, strategic advantages to some of these sponsorship opportunities. We talk about the networking. Well, if you're throwing a networking event and sponsoring that event, um, people remember that name, right? And I think a lot of the sponsorships are, I think, people wanting to, again, make a splash over a rebrand or a recent acquisition or a product launch, or maybe even just a new partnership that they've got. And the sponsorships, you get your name out there. It's included on the agenda. It's included in all the signage. So everybody, as they're walking around in that room and through the hotel, is getting eyes on your logo all the time.
Yeah. I think brand awareness, yeah, I think is huge. I think too, one of the things that my team has been really good at, I think about John Shirey in particular, when he was running ISOAMP for me, they would, whenever they would go to the shows, which I think they did WSAA a couple years ago, but when they would do the shows, they always have like a game or like one time it was like a putt golf. You have three putts and then you get a gift card if you're something. I can't remember all the details, but I think that idea of kind of you want something a little different. You want something that's going to stand out, and you want that engagement. You want people to come over and whether or not it's a potential client, it's like, hey, they can engage a little bit with what you're doing. So I'm kind of curious. You've seen so many of these shows and booths and all that. What stands out to you as like what can differentiate and really give you a great exposure at these shows?
Look, I think there are a number of really cool sponsorships that each of the shows make available, right? A couple of the recent ones from a WASA perspective. The golf tournament is always huge.
Hmm.
Branded pin flags, right? What better social media opportunity do you want for your guys who are going to go out and play golf?
Right.
We've ice sculptures are. I mean, somebody's going to take a picture and somebody's going to post that online, right? And a
Right.
lot of folks are going to do that. And
Right.
so I think there's a lot of those interesting sponsorships that maybe they're not. I think I'm just thinking through like a golf simulator sponsorship, which is always fun because you can make a contest out of it, and you've
Right.
got a lot of engagement.
Yeah.
And I think the more with any of the sponsorships, I think the more engagement you can create,
Hmm.
that the better off you're going to be, and the more ROI you're going to find from it.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it also kind of, validates, again, if you do have a specific product or service or something that you're selling, it kind of gives you that validation to where, I would always have our team like go around to every booth. So if we have a booth, we want to go to every booth and we want to like, hey, where our booth is over here, we're passing out our card, you know what I mean? And so you want to get that exposure, but it kind of validates that where I feel like when you're kind of wandering aimlessly around the show and you're just trying to get people interested in your product, they're kind of like, oh, is there a legitimacy here? And it's like, oh no, our booth is over here in the corner. People will then come by and, oh yeah, I met you yesterday. I wanted to stop by and see what you guys were all about, right? So I think that kind of flow seems to work pretty well too.
Absolutely. Well, and the other part about that is there's so many, like our industry isn't just about, I don't want to, hurt anybody's feelings. It's not just about the sales agent. It's not just about the ISO. There's so many other
Right.
product groups
Yeah.
and
Yep.
software and technology. Again, private equity, venture capital. I mean, there's so many things that kind of flow
Yeah.
together inside the show. So
Mhm.
if you want to see what the rest of the industry looks like, no matter which door you're coming in, it's nice to walk in and be able to walk around the room
Yeah.
and get a better picture of everything that this payments
Yeah.
industry touches.
Hmm. One last question I have for you, John, that I'm just curious about is, are there any trends that you've noticed at the shows as far as integrated payments? So, like, I'm curious, like, are you seeing more ISVs that are wanting to get booths to get that exposure directly to the ISO channel, or I don't know, is there any trends that you've noticed that kind of have changed over the years as far as the types of sponsors or anything like that?
Definitely seeing a lot more. I'll say this, it started with discussion and it's moved toward the exhibitor and the sponsorships, but exactly what you're talking about with more embedded payments,
Right.
more software companies, in a lot of cases looking for distribution,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And then, starting to see some additional things around alternative payments, embedded finance, things of that
Yeah,
nature.
sure.
And so I think that there's always a world for the ISO. There's always a world for the agent. There's
Yep.
going to be space there for them to succeed. I think what we're seeing is with the continued rise and evolution of the Squares and Stripes and Adyens, et cetera, of the world. I think the traditional sales model of the ISO and the agent, it's not that they have to change, but they do have to evolve and be ready to compete against a Toast
Right.
or a Shopify, right? So these other platforms, and even if they're not competing directly in a day-to-day basis, I think we're starting to see that a lot of those technology companies want to become payments companies, and a lot of payments
Yep.
companies are thinking they want to be technology companies. And there's a lot of I think the discussions, I think they start in the hall and then they end up on stage, right? Enough people are
Yeah,
mumbling or whispering about stuff. And,
sure.
we want to make sure, at least at WSAA, I mean, we always want to make sure that what we're putting out on the stage from our panels and sessions and education are things that are relevant to all of our constituents.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Well, before I let you go today, John, I'd love to get a little more information. So WSAA, can you give us the dates and then where would people go to learn more and get registered for that?
Absolutely. Western States Acquirers Association, the show is going to be in Scottsdale. It is September 8, 9, and 10. And registration is at westernstatesacquirers.org.
Awesome.
All the
Well, John,
details can be found, booths can be selected, sponsorships can be bought, golf can be signed up for. So it's going to be great.
awesome. Well, John, definitely looking forward to it. Thank you so much for taking your time to share your insights with us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, James, appreciate you too. Looking forward to seeing you out in Phoenix.
All right, man. Sounds good.